John Avlon. He's an independent centrist moderate. Now, John's a good guy. I've met him on a number of occasions. I like John, but we're going to have a fun disagreement here. His blog is called The Civil War Brewing Among Democrats. It's on the Daily Beast, and John's with us now. How are you, John?
I'm doing great, Tank. How you doing?
Good, good, good. John, before I tell you how you're completely wrong, let's start with your thesis so people know what we're talking about. Now, of course, there's a split among the GOP with the establishment Republicans and the Tea Party guys. You think there might be one brewing in the Democratic Party, and you think that's a bad idea?
Right. It's what I call rhino hunting and dino hunting. And the rhino hunting, you know, people on the far right attacking folks on the center right who they call Republicans in name only. But we all know that's been pretty epidemic in recent years and taken on kind of a rabid intensity among some folks. I mean, I think in general our politics are looking more and more like a cult, and this is one way it gets manifested. But I think what's attracted less attention, and which is much, much smaller but growing, is dino hunting, the same impulse among the Democratic Party. I think the rise of the netroots in particular has made the left really emboldened, and the center is embattled. And you saw that in particular at Bill Halter's challenge to Blanche Lincoln in Arkansas is a good example. You know, where Labor put in $10 million and Move On supported Halter, and you know it's evident in a lot of the talk out there where centrist Democrats, instead of being sort of the seen as the DLC crowd that helped bring Bill Clinton into power and restored, I think, Democrats' credibility with the center, are being attacked as corporatists and corporate sellouts. So you have this insane moment in American politics right now where the far right is accusing President Obama of being a socialist or even a communist, and the far left is accusing him of being a corporate sellout. And it's just a symptom. You can't be both. So it's really just a symptom for how out of whack I think our politics have become.
All right. Where to start in all the disagreements? All right. All right. Now, just because Obama can't be both doesn't mean both are wrong. So now you treat the Republicans and the Democrats as if they're the same, but what you're not talking about is how the spectrum has moved to the right. And since the spectrum, the entire political spectrum has moved to the right, when the right goes further right, they're falling off a cliff. When the so-called left goes a little to the left, they're moving, in my opinion, closer to the center. So now, I know you're going to disagree with that to some degree, but
that's right. Good people can disagree.
Right, but let me ask you, I mean, do you think the Republicans and the Democrats are on the opposite sides of the spectrum here? Do you think the spectrum has not moved? Do you think it's the same thing for these two different camps?
Sure. No, I'm not, and I do not buy into this idea of mathematical equivalence between the far left and the far right. You know, part of the idea I'm trying to push against is this idea that I even reject the word moderate. This idea that it's somehow a split the difference philosophy that tries to position itself in between the extremes, no matter where those are, because that just ignores reality a lot of the time. Look, in many ways, as you know, our political spectrum has shifted to the right. Well, I think in some ways. In other ways, it's moved dramatically to the left. I mean,
Really?
We're having decent and important debates in this country right now, not just about the gay civil rights movement, which would have been unforeseen 30, 40 years ago, but about marriage equality in a case that's brought David Boies and Ted Olson together in California now over Prop 8. You know, that's something in which the American popular opinion and the forefront of our civil rights debates have moved significantly to the left, one might say, because it's certainly not a conservative movement, than anything that could have been contemplated several decades ago.
John, that's a good point.
But to your point, what I think you make is that, and as I write about a lot in my book, Wingnuts, I mean, you know, the folks on the far right always claim the mantle of Goldwater and Reagan, but they forget that, you know, Reagan and Goldwater would have been considered rhinos by today's context. I mean, Goldwater was in favor of gays in the military 30 years ago. His wife was a co-founder of Planned Parenthood. That's an inconvenient truth that folks on the far right hate to hear, but it is a symbol of how the right in particular has gotten more doctrinaire.
Yeah, I wrote a piece for Politico about how the ghost of Reagan. Reagan raised taxes 11 times, ran the hell out of Lebanon, as he should have. Shouldn't have gotten in there in the first place. Did a deal with terrorists, arms for hostages, and arms for, the Iranian deal, I should say. And the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And they were trying to pass a bill or a platform in the RNC of what's a real Republican, and Ronald Reagan wouldn't have come anywhere close to passing.
Exactly right, and this is what happens. The truth is rarely pure and rarely pure and never simple, and this is the party with these ideological party purists, because they're not dealing in reality. They whitewash and their own sainted figures, and they stop dealing with them in reality, and that starts dooming our whole political system.
No, but John, then look. You have to be. Then you can't just say, "Oh, the crazies on the left and the crazies on the right." I think that totally distorts the playing field. I mean, when you look at, as you acknowledge with Goldwater and Reagan, you could just keep going back. I mean, Eisenhower now looks significantly more liberal than Barack Obama, and Eisenhower was a Republican, and Obama's a Democrat. The spectrum has moved tremendously.
Well, I don't know if I agree with you on that. I'm a big Ike fan. I think Ike was very conservative in some respects, and consistently fiscally conservative, for example. And one of the reasons he tried to cut government spending a lot, even though the folks, the conservatives of his day, didn't think he did it sufficiently, was, for example, when he cut military spending, he knew that he was one of the few people who could do that after the war, and McCarthy couldn't get away with calling him a communist like he did George Marshall. But just saying, I mean, the larger point, and I've taken a lot of heat from the left, is I think this thesis I have that the far right and the far left can be equally insane. Now, what I always follow that with is, but there's no question that in the first year of Obama, the far right has been far crazier. And my whole point is, look, neither party has a monopoly on virtue or vice, and I think there's a lot in our political debates today, which is conspiring to move people to this doctrinaire position in support of their ideology and party, and trying to make the parties more and more ideologically divided. And that's, I think, what's caused the deep anger and disaffection out there from independent voters in particular, who are at the highest level in recorded history because the parties are more polarized than ever.
But let's go to the heart of that error, in my opinion. And let me just quickly say on Eisenhower, warned us about the military-industrial complex. If Obama had given that speech, they'd say he was
I agree with you.
The world's biggest
would be
communist.
peeling themselves off the ceiling.
Right. And number two, he said, look, only a bunch of clownish Texas oil billionaires want to get rid of Social Security. And they're lunatics, right? And Obama has a deficit commission which will probably try to not get rid of Social Security, but cut deeply into Social Security.
Well, no. I mean, look, entitlement reform right now, I mean, that's another show, and I mean, I'm always happy to come on and talk to you and have a good debates about this stuff, but entitlement reform is not killing grandma. Entitlement reform is the only way we're going to get out of the hole.
Entitlement reform, if it was real entitlement reform, I'd be in favor of it. Okay, I think the debt and deficit are terrible. Okay, it's a way to get the last piggy bank. It's definitely a way to rob grandma and grandpa because that's the only thing left to rob. But
I mean, you can argue, the whole system we've got is a Ponzi scheme.
It is. So let's go to that, John. Let's go to that. That's because that's the heart of the problem. It's not a left-right issue. It's a corporatist versus non-corporatist issue. Today I was excited because the Republicans threw a couple of bums out. Now, I don't agree with the guys that they elected in their primaries. I think they're probably more right-wing ideologically. But they voted against guys who voted for the bailout. I like that, and I applaud them for that.
Yeah, and by the way, and I also actually support and was interested and encouraged with the audit the Fed movement that brought some folks from the far left and far right together, because to my mind, you should never be afraid to audit anything that takes taxpayer dollars.
I don't even know who the far left is. Who's the far left? What are they doing?
Well, in that case, I'm thinking of Ron Paul and Alan Grayson, co-signing a bill together, which is about as,
But
far out as
Alan
you
Grayson,
get.
you can't name, in my opinion, you can't name one thing Alan Grayson said that's wrong.
Oh, I take you up on that.
Go
for example,
for it.
one of the things in my book, just for fun, I criticized the hell out of Representative Trent Franks of Arizona, who called President Obama an enemy of humanity. But if we're going to stay with the language of that rhetoric, which is so offensive,
I knew you were going to go to
opposition, Alan Grayson said that Republicans were the enemy of peace.
But they are. But they literally are.
No,
but John, you
not
have to
literally
confess that.
the enemies of peace.
No.
That's ridiculous.
Okay, first of all, John, look, I don't want to devolve into the rhetoric conversation because I think Alan Grayson is right on the substance, and the rhetoric is a distraction. But that being said, they started two wars. One that was completely and utterly senseless. How can you be a bigger enemy of peace?
Ran on as Ford's VP, complaining about the Democratic wars of the 20th century.
All right, that was then. The spectrum has moved. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
That's just a matter of the responsibilities of power, no matter what party's in the presidency.
I agree with that. But
to your point, explain to me how. Because I actually do want to understand your perspective on this better. That an issue like, if we both agree that debts and deficit are A, terrible, B, that we've gotten a weird Ponzi scheme situation that's unsustainable, how does that how does that attach itself to corporatism as you see it?
Oh, absolutely. That's a great question. Okay, so here's the problem, John. It's not that we're having ideological debates like pro-life or pro-choice. I love those debates. I've got no problems with that. That's what I want to get back to, right? The problem is both the Democrats and the Republicans, the ones that you applaud as centrists and independents, are not that at all, okay? What they're doing is, okay, the banks screwed up. Fantastic. Let's give all the money to the banks. You want to start wars? The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower, a Republican, warned us about, makes a tremendous amount of money from wars. Fantastic. Let's spend $1 trillion on wars. But when they run out of money, who do they come and get it from? They come and get it from grandma and grandpa, and they're going to go and cut Social Security and Medicare. If you said to me, I care about deficit and debt, I'm going to cut the Pentagon, I'm going to raise taxes, and I'm going to cut Social Security and Medicare, then I go, okay, I get it. That makes sense. But if you say to me, no, I'm only going to take it from the poor, and I'm going to give it to the rich, well, and to the top corporations, that's corporatism.
All right, I appreciate your point, but let's look at how it plays out in regular politics. I mean, the folks who are protesting, and you know, my book, most recent book, Wingnuts, I tried to trace sort of the first year of Obama and the rise of extremism we saw. And you look at the early Tea Party protests, which I think was misunderstood. I think at the beginning, you know, people try to put populism in a and I think this dovetails to your point, in a kind of partisan filter. And they try to say it's anger at big business or big government. And I think in a recession, when people are trying to balance their own checkbooks and they're struggling, small business owners in particular, one of the reasons that the stimulus as well as the bailout, that combination of things angered so many people so deeply who identified themselves on the right side of the spectrum is because they felt like they have to balance their budget. How come big government and big business is arrogantly exempt? They can write themselves checks forever off the taxpayers' backs. But that anger and the association we're dealing with in politics right now, and it's not just smoke and mirrors, is that there is a big government, big spending impulse from the left, which is angering folks in the center and center-right. And it's one of the reasons that Democrats right now are facing a serious drubbing in the midterm elections. And the idea that they're only alienated their base, it's a mirror image argument of what the argument Rove used to make. And I admit, look, I do not like play-to-the-base politics. I do not like people who try to divide our country in order to conquer it. I think we should be placing a lot more emphasis on defining common ground and building on it. And I don't think, even though a lot of people on the right disagree with me on this, that centrist means you're simply signing checks to corporations and in favor of big government. I think it's about actually trying to move back to a balanced budget. And when you had Clinton and Gingrich in power, even though they fought the hell out of each other, we reduced the deficit and handed a surplus to Bush, who squandered it.
Look, this is what drives me crazy, is if every Republican and every Democrat has always been the same, time immemorial. I used to be a Republican. I was a liberal Republican from New Jersey.
I know. I remember.
Okay.
I love the conversations with you about this.
Right. And then I was in favor. And then by the end of Clinton, I decided Clinton had done the right thing because I cared about balancing the budget. Right.
Yeah.
And they worked together with the Republicans to do it. Okay. Now, these are not the same Democrats. These are not the same Republicans. Why did I switch over to not really being a Democrat, but certainly being a progressive? It's the same reason Charles Barkley gave. I stopped being a Republican when they lost their mind. But John, what drives me crazy about you is that you're not admitting the obvious. They lost their mind. When you talk about two different bases, the right-wing base is a bunch of lunatics. When you talk about, hold on, let me finish.
Sure.
Hold on. When you talk about the left-wing base, what, they wanted the public option? I mean, that's so centrist. 70% of the country wanted the public option. And you go down the list on every major issue, what the so-called far left base wants is exactly in line with what the center of the country is. The spectrum has shifted, and you won't recognize it.
Look, I appreciate this, and this is a great conversation, an important one. And there's no question that the rhino hunting the Republican Party has been engaging in over the past 10 years in particular, and more, has basically tried to push centrist Republicans out of the party. They demand ideological fealty. I hate that impulse in politics. When anybody wants people to walk in lockstep with the party line, I get nervous because history says bad things are about to happen. I actually like it when we have people on the center right and center left who buck their party and have a debate within the parties. And one of the big secrets, it seems to me, is that the center right and the center left actually have more in common with each other. To your point about the left, what is the status of the far left in America? For a long time in this country, we've been fighting debates over kind of echoes of the 1960s, right? And you and I are of the same generation, and actually my grandparents are Greek. You're the Young Turk, but I'm actually at my grandmother's house right now in Ohio talking to you. But But you know, people forget, especially on the left, the deep damage the excesses of the late 1960s did to the Democratic Party. I mean, you know, in 1968, Nixon begins, that backlash against the far left begins, and Nixon begins 40 years, essentially, of Republican control of Congress. And that's where the patriotism gap, the perceived patriotism gap, which is so destructive to Democratic credentials, perceptions, not reality, of national security began. People forget, we associate in our time radical anti-government action with the far right. But in the late 60s, early 70s, what people forget is that, you know, anti-government groups, there was over 1,000 cases of arsons, bombings, and shootings from far-left anti-government groups. That's an example of the way that the far left at that time, no, hold on, I'm going to get to your point, but at that time, the way it started the pendulum swinging off-center. Now, in recent years, I think, you know, even though the Republican Party loves to relitigate the 1960s, that's why they brought Bill Ayers in. They're comfortable on it. They know they can win that fight. The more important fight today, it seems to me, with regards to the people on the far left of the Democratic Party, is the power of the public sector unions that are being motivated by money, that are bankrupting states, and that are huge power brokers in the Democratic Party, leading a charge against what they often call corporatists. And I think that's the real front now. I condemn the far right, especially the religious right, and people who use fear and hate in the service of hyperpartisanship, which is very often something folks in the far right do. And I condemn it, you know, consistently in my columns in the Daily Beast, in my books. That's what I try to do.
John.
But I do try to acknowledge, because I really believe that we're in a cycle, we're in a situation right now where people are engaging in the politics of incitement. And I think it's dangerous for the country. And I think the only way you stop that is if you stand up to the extremes on both sides.
No, but you haven't made a single case, in my opinion, of someone being extreme on the left-hand side. Look, John,
sure. Okay,
look. I got to ask you one last thing. Okay.
Sure.
And we're talking to John Avlon. He writes for the Daily Beast, and his new book is Wingnuts: How the Lunatic Fringe is Hijacking America. Look, John, to address all your points, all that stuff you're talking about from the 1960s, 40, 50 years ago. We don't live in that world anymore. It works for the Fox News audience because the average age of an O'Reilly audience is 71 years old. So
but
they
that's
remember
how
Bill Ayers.
I hear you. Look, man, I hear you. Look, part of the problem is I think our politics, basically for too long, it's been this generational grudge match between the baby boomers, the crew cuts and the long hairs, and they've been fighting out their campus politics for 40 years, and the rest of us who are a lot younger realize it's bull, and realize that has nothing to do with today's world and very little to do with solutions.
But today's world is dominated by corporate interests that have bought all of our politicians. I mean, look at this. Hold on.
I disagree with you. I don't think they've bought all our politicians.
Oh, you're crazy. Okay, look. I got to give you facts on this. So when you say, look, we've moved to the left on the gay rights movement, you're right. That's a good point, right? But I will give you, and you watch from here on out, okay? I'll give you a guide for, you'll see what goes left and what goes right. The progressives will never win on anything that involves money or business. They will only win on social issues. Gay rights doesn't really affect anybody's bottom line, so the progressives win on that, right? But when it involves money, the conservative position, what now is called the centrist position, the corporatist position, will always win. Like I said, overwhelmingly, look, you say the union power, union gets spit upon on a daily basis by Democrats. Did they get card check? Hold on, John. No. Did they get card check? No, nothing. They wanted public option desperately. Did they get it? Nothing. What the hell has the union got? They got nothing. And you're talking about their power? No, when you look at the corporations, look at what Obama just did. Obama said, even though the House or the Senate, neither one of them had voted for it, the White House made them put into the financial reform bill something that says the shareholders cannot control what the amount of money and who gets hired and who gets fired for executives and boards. Now, why did the White House, who's supposed to be a progressive / Maoist, do that? No, they're corporatists. And they wanted to help the CEOs and they wanted to help the executives because that's where they get their money from. It's as obvious as day. Can you not see that?
I totally appreciate and I agree that money corrupts politics and corporations. Nobody should believe in the inherent morality of any corporation or any political party. And when we want to keep checks and balances and a great deal of accountability, which is why I'm in favor of audits and all that. But you've got to remember that, you know, the Democratic Party, the way we used to analyze politics, right, was reactionary, radical, and conservative. And the far left has always been hurt when it's been seen, as it has been in the past, as radically anti-business. Because most Americans, whether they work in a small business, like 70% of Americans, and small business owners feel sort of politically homeless in the current environment, it seems to me, or big business, which is increasingly divided between Wall Street and a manufacturing sector which is going south, and I'm talking from Youngstown, Ohio, former steel mill town, that when the far left is seen as hostile to business, that's where it loses the center, and that's where it loses a governable majority. Remember, the debates that you were talking about earlier, the Democrats wouldn't have won any health care, for example, if they'd moved further to the left. I mean, good people can disagree with that, but I think it's pretty evident. Already Obama is coming under such huge heat based largely on distortions, I think, because I don't think he's been a far left president by any stretch of the imagination. But because the psychic damages from the excesses of the late 1960s and 70s still have resonance to people.
John, look,
and that needs to be dealt with and understood. And I don't think that, while we should absolutely watch all our money and be deeply suspicious about any use of taxpayer money, the way we privatize, for example, privatizing profits and socializing losses, that's something we should all care about because it's our goddamn money. Excuse me. But I think analyzing everything as corporatist versus not is
John,
too simple.
Once again, I hate to do it to you, but you're missing the point. It's not anti-business or pro-business. I got no problems with Nike. I got no problems with my dad, who's a small business owner. I'm a small business owner. We don't have a problem with business. We have a problem with business taking our money, okay, and business buying our politicians. If they don't buy our politicians, of course we're in favor of business. They create jobs. There is no far left that's like, oh, I hate business. It's a fiction. It's a myth. We're just, we don't want the big business buying our politicians and then getting bailout money.
I don't agree with that. I don't think that is a far left. Look, here, let's go for some common ground for the fun of it, because I think it's important. I agree with most of what you just said, because we all should care about taxpayer money going to bail out private interests or subsidize failing programs endlessly, right? But I do think that when you say that, for example, in a moment of economic crisis, and maybe you have a lot in common with some of the folks on the far right in this, the Tea Party folks who really do believe that we shouldn't have had any bailouts. But I think, that the impulse of the Bush administration at first and the Obama administration second, while, they rightly ultimately rejected the insane proposition that, to my mind, that Paulson put forward of 3 pages with no government oversight, and no Republicans were screaming socialism then, government does have an interest in trying to stabilize society and the economy in a time of crisis. There is action that government can take. And then you need to learn from mistakes. Right. And that's what it seems to me that we too often don't do.
No, it's the same old problems as always. It's the wrong words. It's not pro-bailout or anti-bailout. It's how do you do the bailout. So, Tim Geithner said, oh, we had to do the bailout, so I gave him all the money. And without any checks and without getting anything back for the taxpayers. That was the wrong way to do the bailout. But we got to leave it there. We're 1,000,000% out of time. John,
I look for you. I'm happy to continue the conversation anytime, my friend.
All right. John Avlon's book is Wingnuts, How the Lunatic Fringe is Hijacking America. Thanks for coming on, John. Great conversation.
Pleasure, man. Take care.